On this week's episode of Work Trends, we're talking about how to build an A team with author Whitney Johnson. Welcome to the Work Trends podcast from Talent Culture. I'm your host, Meghan M. Biro. Every week, I interview interesting people and brands who are reimagining work. For more information, be sure to check us out at talentculture.com and join us live on Twitter every Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern using the hashtag WorkTrends. Today's guest is Whitney Johnson. She is a seasoned leader and business coach and author of 3 of my favorite books, Disrupt Yourself, Dare, Dream, Do, and her latest book, Build an A Team, Play to their strengths and lead them up the learning curve. Welcome to Work Trends, Whitney.
Thank you, Meghan. I am delighted to be here.
You and I go way back, and once upon a time we lived in the same state, and now you're elsewhere. Tell us where you are today.
We are living in a town called Lexington, Virginia. It's in central Virginia. It's very rural, but also the home of 3 universities, Southern Virginia University, where my husband teaches, as well as Washington and Lee and Virginia Military Institute. It's a county of about 25,000 people, and there are cows that are directly across the street from where we live. Yes, it's lovely.
Well, welcome back. And the beauty of us is that we're always going to be friends because we are just a Skype or a tweet away, right?
That's exactly correct.
So tell me, what inspired you to write your latest book, Build an A Team?
It's a great question. And it's always an interesting thing of like, how do you come up with an idea to write about something and devote several years of your life to a project or an idea? And what happened with this book in particular is I had written Disrupt Yourself in 2015. And after I went out and talked to people about the book, I'd have people say, okay, I get it. You know, I want to disrupt myself. I want to do something new. I want to be willing to change and challenge myself. But how do I get my boss to let me do it? And if I'm a manager, how do I get my team to do that? And so Build an A Team really started with this idea of, okay, so Disrupt Yourself is about you. How do I help people build an ecosystem where disruption is actually possible? And so that led to my writing the book of Build an A Team. What was interesting, though, is as I started writing it, I realized that this wasn't just how do you create the ecosystem. It was, in fact, if you as an organization want to be competitive, if you want to lower your we're about to be disrupted score, you are going to allow the people inside of your organization to disrupt themselves. So it was sort of this aha that came in the process of answering an initial question. I realized I was answering a much bigger question, which is how do I help my organization remain innovative and competitive?
Very cool. Can you tell our audience just how much time it took you to write this book? I know, and I'm going to include myself in this mix. I'm always one of those people that's like, I'm writing a book, but I haven't done it yet. What's involved?
Yeah, Meghan, it's such an interesting question because so I would say it depends on where you are. So for example, with this book, when I decided to sit down and write it, we already had in our minds, okay, we know we want to write about how do we create a team where this is possible. I had the basic framework of disruption or the personal framework of personal disruption already in place. And so then it became a question of, okay, so now I've got to sit down and actually write the book. And so from the time of sitting down and writing the book with not only myself, but having 2 really good editors that I worked with to move that process along, it was about 6 months from the time that we really started focusing on it and delivered a first draft of the manuscript to the publisher, Harvard Business Press.
Good to know. See, everyone out there utilizing the hashtag work trends. It's possible, but there's a lot of planning that goes into this. So listen, in this book, you tell leaders to manage your team as a collection of S-curves. Break that down for us. What we found is that, or the big aha that I had when I was still working and investing with Clayton Christensen at the Harvard Business School, and we were looking at disruptive innovation and how quickly an innovation is going to be adopted so that we could figure out, does it make sense to invest in this company or not? We were using the S-curve, and this was popularized by E.M. Rogers in 1962 to help you figure out, when will something get adopted or move into mass adoption? And the big aha that I had as we were applying this is that this
S curve or learning curve could also help us understand people. And if you can picture in your mind very quickly the bottom of the S, you know that when you first start something new, there's a lot of time's going to pass and very little's going to happen. You're like working really, really hard and nothing's happening, which is exactly what you would expect at the bottom of the S. But then as you start to put together what feels like a jumble of jigsaw puzzle pieces, you move into the knee of that S, or the steep part, the tipping point, where everything starts to come together. And so you're no longer feeling discouraged and feeling like I have no idea what I'm doing. But in fact, now you're feeling increasingly competent. With that comes confidence. And this is where you're fully engaged in the work that you're doing. So the steep part of the S. And then after about 2 to 3 years on this particular curve, you get to the top of the S. And again, time passes, not much is happening, but now it's not because you don't know anything, it's because you know too much. You become a master. And once you become a master, you become bored. And so what it means is after, on average, you can be on one particular learning curve at most about 4 years, and it's time for you to jump and do something new. And so you want this cycle of learning, and then you leap, and then you repeat. And so the big aha here, though, was not only that everybody is on a learning curve, but that your organization is a collection of learning curves. And you build an A team by managing where people are on those curves. So for example, at any given time, you want to have 70% of your people in the sweet spot. So that steep, sleek back part of the curve. You want to have 15% of your people at the low end, the ones that are inexperienced, the ones that are a little bit discouraged. The reason being is they ask questions like, why do we do it like this? And then you want 15% of your people at the high end who aren't necessarily learning a lot at this point, but they're the pace setters. They're the people who have this perspective. They're on the top of the curve, and they can give you a sense of what has been done, what hasn't been done, and something to kind of bump up against. And when you're willing to optimize those S curves or those learning curves, you've got a team where everybody's engaged, everybody's learning, and you're able to really be innovative and competitive vis-a-vis your competitors.
Okay, so here's the trick question here. It all sounds great, Whitney, right? But how do we actually apply that to hiring?
Right?
It's
not a trick question. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, well, absolutely.
It is, though, if you think about the numbers of people we bring into organizations who end up not staying after that introductory period, and we waste all that funding and training and heart and mind. It seems like a trick question still, right? It shouldn't, but it does. That's just our reality over here, right? So tell us, break that down for us.
Yeah. So the way I would apply this to hiring is I would say that we are frequently hiring the wrong people. What we're doing, and before I tell you, give you the nuts and bolts of this, I want to tell you a story that I think will really capture the imagination of your listeners. There was a town in Butte, Montana, mid-1800s. It's known as the richest hill on the earth. You had a lot of miners coming. They were speculating, panning for gold and silver. Early rush disappoints, so a lot of them sell off their claims for dirt cheap. So then there's this next wave of miners that comes in, and they are able to mine and discover copper. Now, at the time, you're like, copper, well, copper's copper, right? That's not gold. And so it wasn't that exciting. But then technology advanced over the next couple of decades. Electrical wiring becomes a thing. And as that happened, then copper became extremely valuable. And so now you've got these people who are known as the Copper Kings because they were willing to be patient. I think of Butte, Montana a lot when I think about hiring. I think people are like, I can't find anybody to hire. And what I think is happening is they're saying, well, I want top of the curve expertise. I want the gold standard when copper would actually do. And so one of the things, one of the implications for this in hiring is to be willing to hire for potential, not for proficiency. Because one of the things that happens is we hire people at the top of a curve. And what happens when you're at the top of the curve? Well, on the one hand, you're an expert and it's not going to take you very long to figure things out. But on the other hand, within about 6 months, they're going to be very, very bored. And so now what do you do? Because you're not going to fire them because they're actually good at what they're doing, but it means that they're going to disengage. They're not going to be really, really excited. And so the way this applies to hiring is to be willing to hire at the bottom of the curve rather than the top. And great example, give you one quick great example. It's Boston based. You're probably familiar with it. It's a home security company. It's called SimpliSafe. It's install it yourself hardware for home security. when they started hiring, they hired absolutely no one with any industry experience. They wanted to train their people in-house, from their call center workers to their engineers. Why? Because they didn't want anybody to be bored. Because when we're bored, we get lazy. And so on the one hand, we're like, well, I don't want to hire people because if I train them, they're going to leave. But we know from the data and the research that one of the things that people most prize is being able to be trained. And when we're trained, that builds loyalty. And so people who are trained are less likely, not more likely to leave. So hire for potential, not for proficiency. It's like buying low, it's selling high. And when you do that, time is on your side, because time plus competence equals boredom.
How many people out there are hiring the wrong people? Let's all think about this and take this into the future when we think about our hiring strategies. I think you bring up a really important point. Everybody could potentially have a place. Look at all avenues and all directions. I love that. So once you hire people, then how do you onboard them to keep them moving up that curve? Because that, to me, is the secret sauce here.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First of all, recognize and even have a conversation with them of pointing out to them this image or this visual of the learning curve, because there's this tendency that when we hire someone, we think we've hired them. Subconsciously, we believe we've hired them forever, our one true employee. And it's just not true. Like we need to understand that they're going to be on a learning curve. They're going to be at the bottom for 6 months. They're going to be in the sweet spot for 1 to 3 years, and they're going to get to the top. And they've got 6 months, maybe a year before it's going to be time for them to do something new. So you want to have a plan for this person. And that plan includes things like don't micromanage them. Remember that it's important for you to teach them, and you may not be able to teach them, but to have a plan in place for them to get the skills so that they can move up the learning curve. And then the other thing that you want to do is very early on, because they are at the low end of the curve and they don't know what they're doing, is to give them lots of constraints. Whenever people are new, we feel this tremendous degree of uncertainty. We don't know what we're doing. We need something to bump up against. And so if you will give them very tightly scoped assignments so that they can get feedback quickly, then they're going to be able to iterate quickly and move up the curve more quickly again. And then the third piece of advice I would say is to really monitor for momentum. They're going to have days where you're like, they don't really seem like they know what they're doing. But are they still having fun? Because then that's a good sign. And
which
then
matters,
also,
right?
Right. And then also, if last week it looked like, okay, they knew what they were doing 4 hours out of the 40 hours. This week is at 8 hours, because the starting point is to a large degree irrelevant. What matters really is, are they growing and how fast? And if they're growing, then you know this is the right curve. Let's stay with this. If they're not growing, then you've got two things. Number one, maybe you need to get them more training. Actually, not two things, three things. Number one, you may need to get them more training. Number two, it could be just two things. Number one, it may be that they need more training. And number two, it may be potentially that it's not the right curve. And the reason that is possible is because people tend to lead with and talk about on their resume the things that they do well, those things that they learned how to do, that they've worked hard to learn how to do, as opposed to what they do best, which are their superpowers. And so sometimes if they're not gaining momentum, it's not because they're not hard workers. It's just that they're potentially in the wrong seat. So maybe they need more training to move up the curve. Maybe you just need to be more patient, and maybe it's potentially the wrong curve. And can you redeploy them somewhere else inside of the organization?
So when we look at research and data, it tells us that the average length of stay right now for employees is about 2 to 3 years.
Yep.
Okay. So say you are at the top of your own S curve. You're an expert. You've hit that stride. How should you manage that next step in your career from there? I think there's a lot of people out there who are looking at this data and wondering, what is that time when I need to jump, right? What do I do?
Yeah, exactly.
Even if I love the culture.
Yeah, so it's such it's a gnawing question for so many of us. I think the first thing I would say is, now you know you're normal, right? You know that you're a learning machine. You're meant to not know how to do something, figure out how to do it, and then master it, and then try something new. And that for many people, that's going to last, especially if you're not coming in right at the low end of the learning curve. You're going to have 2 to 3 years in a role before it's going to be time to do something new. So I would say, first of all, know that you're normal. This is your brain saying, I got to do something new, because if I'll do something new, then I'm going to be innovative and I will be happy, and therefore my company will be happy because I'm innovating on their behalf. So that's the first thing to be aware of. Ideally, you'll look for something inside of your organization. And depending on your boss, that's going to be a real possibility where you can say to them, okay, we've got this learning curve. Hey, I'm at the top of the curve. Now, you know that of course is going to be a risk for you, because they may just say, okay, goodbye. But if you got, a boss who's really invested not only in you, but in the company, and you're a high performer, then they're going to look for something for you to do. And you're going to look for yourself for something to do, either on the team, inside the company, with a client, with a trading partner. And if all else fails, somewhere else, but then you will, over the lifetime of your career, become an ambassador for your boss, and certainly for the organization in general. What I would say is, if that doesn't work, for example, if you're the boss, if it's your business, if you work on your own, then you've got to give yourself a new stretch assignment. It may be that you decide to do something like, instead of focusing on one type of client, you're going to focus on another type of client. It may be that you decide to do offer new services to your clients. If all else fails, I would say then and I'm a business owner, I own my own business. I'm not going to jump to a new curve. I love what I'm doing. So one of the things that I'm trying to do to make sure that I continue to move up my curve is make sure I'm studying every day. There are things that we can do to perfect our craft, whether it's studying our industry and how we run a business, whether it's studying, I'm studying blockchain every day for a month, for 15 minutes a day, but just so that I'm learning about something new and then trying to figure out how can this apply to my business. So when you're at the top of a curve, it's your own business, you're the boss or the CEO. That's where mindfulness becomes really important, and a willingness to study and figure out, okay, jumping isn't an option. So how do I impose constraints in the form of my own stretch assignment?
Love it. And I'm also a business owner myself, so I can completely relate. Blockchain, interesting. What led you there, by the way, and how are you disciplined enough to do this every day?
So first of all, what led me there is that I keep hearing about it all the time. And I find myself thinking, I don't know really what this is. Like, I have a very, very cursory understanding of it. And I'll find myself thinking, oh, I don't need to know about that. And I thought, okay, that's exactly what happens to people who get disrupted. I don't need to know about this. I'm just going to keep learning about the stuff that I already know something about. So there's a part of this which is me saying, okay, the person who says, or the company who says, oh, I don't need to know about that, is the person that gets disrupted. So that's partly in my consciousness. Another thought that I had is, not too long ago, I interviewed Tom Peters on my podcast, and he wrote that book, Excellence Dividend, like really
sure
management guru, right? He said on the podcast that he a couple years ago took a year off. He basically cut back his speaking 85% to 15% and just studied, because he realized he was behind. And I was like, I don't want to have to do what Tom's done. I want to just start studying now. Now your question is, how do I make the time? Well, I have a list of daily questions, this morning routine of things that I do, a spreadsheet. Did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? Am I doing the studying every single day? No, but even if I do it 50% of the time, that's more than I would have done it otherwise. And I'm keeping it really small chunks of like 15 minutes. So I've got an article up on my computer. I look at it. I see something else that's about that. Not expecting myself to know it perfectly, but if I'll just start swimming in those waters, I'm at the low end of the curve. I'm inexperienced. Gradually, all those different jigsaw puzzle pieces are going to start to come together, and I'm going to start to make sense of it. So I'm trusting that if I put enough pieces in my head, that jumble will start to coalesce into something that moves me into the sweet spot of understanding this particular topic, which in this case is blockchain.
Love it. And again, it's all about just having it in your conscience, right?
Exactly.
Thinking about it, seeing that on paper, the power of that, even if you're not doing it that day, the brain has a way of taking that in, interestingly enough. So, Whitney, a lot of our audience here are recruiting and HR practitioners, learning and development pros, people who really care about culture. Talk to us from your point of view. What is HR's role in building really strong teams.
What I think is really exciting about this framework is that it elevates HR to a new role as a strategic partner. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you're able to we've got a diagnostic, it's a disruption diagnostic that allows you to see where people are on their learning curve. Are they low end? Are they the sweet spot at the high end? On an individual basis, it's somewhat interesting, but where it gets really interesting is when you take that data in aggregate and you can say to yourself, okay, CEO, I've just taken the pulse of the workforce. What we know is that if we're innovative and optimally situated, then we've got 70% of our people in the sweet spot, 15% the high end, 15% of the low. But we've got 30% of our people who are at the high end of their learning curve. What does that mean for us? Well, that means that we've got 30% of our people who are getting kind of bored. Some of them are going to leave, probably the best ones, and the other ones are going to get complacent and stay. And you know what that means for us? That means we're about to get disrupted. Not tomorrow, not next week, but we're at risk. And so we now, as an HR partner, you can say to them, we've got to find a way to redeploy some of these people so that they re-engage. And as we re-engage those people, put them at the low end of the curve, now they're not going to know what they're doing. They're figuring stuff out. And when they're figuring stuff out, that's when they start to be innovative on behalf of themselves, but also on behalf of the organization. So that's where it gets really, really exciting for you as an HR manager, because you're now becoming a strategic partner for the organization.
And how can we rethink the way HR is working with hiring managers directly?
So I would say there are a couple of things. For example, if you're working with a hiring manager, we kind of alluded to this a moment ago, is this idea of when they're hiring people, help them understand that if they're only hiring top of the curve expertise, they're going to maybe have 6 months, a year and a half where they're really engaged. But if they're willing to hire at the low end of the curve and you will help them get these people trained, they don't necessarily have to know how to do it, but they need to just put in place or facilitate the training. Then you're going to have this person on your team for 3 to 4 years. They're going to be much more loyal. And so you can really help them think about how to hire, who to hire, help them think about the fact that they might have a person on their team that seems to be underperforming, but historically they were actually a really strong performer. Maybe it's because they're bored and you need to figure out what to do, and you can help them understand that maybe it's time for them just to go do something new. So those are a couple of thoughts of how you in HR can work with the hiring manager to implement these ideas.
You also wrote a book called Disrupt Yourself, which you've been referring to this word disrupt several times in this conversation already, right?
Right.
We think about disruption in terms of technology, but how should we think about disruption in terms of people and teams? Because it's a little bit different.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Okay, so well, in this particular instance, or the term of art here this is from the work that I did with Clayton Christensen, who's the father of disruptive innovation. And what a disruptor is in this particular context is a silly little thing that takes over the world. So you've got things like the telephone disrupted the telegraph. You have the automobile that disrupted the horse and buggy. More recently, we had Toyota disrupt General Motors, Netflix, Blockbuster, and then Uber, cabs. And so you've got the disruptor. It gets its foothold at the low end of the market. Initially, it's super inferior, just doesn't have much of a market position. And so the incumbent looks at him and says, well, it's just a silly little Corolla if it's Toyota. So let's go after bigger, faster, better Cadillac. The bad news, depending on your point of view, it might be the good news, is that once a disruptor gets a foothold, it also is motivated by bigger, faster, better. And with Toyota, it was Lexus. So personal disruption then is how you take all of these ideas and make them meaningful to you. The one big exception is, as with personal disruption, you are both Toyota and General Motors. You're both Netflix and Blockbuster. You're both the silly little thing and the incumbent. And you're basically willing to disrupt yourself to do something new, to become a silly little thing, so that you can take over your world. And so that's what personal disruption looks like. And so and we do it all the time. Like, you go through high school. When you graduate from high school, you go to college, you become a silly little thing. You move up the learning curve in college, you graduate from college, you disrupt yourself, and you go into the workforce. You become a silly little thing. And then you do that with your first job. And then the cycle.
Wait. You become a what?
a silly little thing.
That's pretty funny. Can anyone chime in out there using the hashtag work trends? Thoughts on silly little thing? Come on, that's hilarious. I had to take a moment. So listen, you write a lot about how to be a good boss. What are some common mistakes we all make as bosses and managers?
Well, it's something I alluded to earlier. This idea that when someone comes to work for us, that they're going to be there forever. And so when they start to move up a learning curve and they're ready to move on, instead of saying, okay, this is a natural progression, this honors the biology of change, I'm going to let them do something new. We're like, no, you can't leave. In fact, I feel betrayed that you want to leave. And if you do leave, that's going to be my performance is going to go down. And so I think one of the common mistakes that we make is believe they're going to be there forever. And when that is time for them to go, we somehow feel betrayed. And so we become a talent hoarder instead of being someone who is a talent magnet who, once they get to the top, we allow them to jump to a new curve. Coach Calipari at Kentucky is a great example of that. He has these great basketball players come in. They get to the top of the curve really quickly. He doesn't say, no, you've got to stay here for 4 years. He's like, okay, come for 1 year. We'll help you jump to a new curve. You know that if you come here, you can do that. And so he becomes a talent magnet because people know that he has their interest in mind first and foremost. And by having their interest first, then that builds loyalty. And by building loyalty, he's able to build a great team.
Talk about getting real with the market, right? That's just reality. I just don't think people are going to stay where they are, even if they're happy at this point.
Exactly.
So everybody's elevating their game at this point, literally. You have to. Just get real. I know when I hire, I've hired for years, right? When I was a corporate recruiter, and now for my own business, you have to get real about the fact that people want to grow, and there's so many opportunities now and flavors of career. Help people get there. They'll never forget you, right?
Exactly. They will never forget you. You will be a talent magnet. You will be that person that someone will look back on their career and say, because of Meghan, because of John, because of this person, my career was forever changed. And it's because when a person gets at the top of the learning curve, you help them jump, and they will never forget you because of that.
Last question. I have to know, how do you stay inspired and motivated? And second question is, what do you read, watch, or listen to right now that's really making you think?
Yeah, so I think I kind of touched on this a minute ago. I stay inspired and motivated every single morning. I get up, I listen to or read a sacred text in my faith tradition. I try to meditate every day. I do reading and listening. Right now, I'm listening to Bob Proctor, who wrote a book called You Were Born Rich. She's like 80 years old. Really, really interesting stuff around how we can wire our brain and change. So that's something between sort of those two things is something that I do every single morning. I also am reading a book right now that's really inspired me. It's called Off the Clock by Laura Vanderkam. I interviewed her on my podcast not too long ago, and the book is just fascinating. And what's fascinating for me is she says that in the present, our present self never wants to do anything because our present self is very, very lazy. And so we'll think, well, I don't want to work out right now, or I don't want to go on that hike this morning. She said, so what you've got to do is stop letting your current self be in control and let your future and your past self be in charge. Because if you say to yourself, because you say to yourself, I'm going to plan. So for example, on 4th of July, we planned to go on a family hike. Well, it would have been easy to sleep in, but I said to myself, and this is what she says, is let your future and past self think to yourself, okay, after I've gone on this hike, I will have this memory of our family having done this together. I'll have these photos that I can relish. And if you'll let that part of yourself be in charge, then you'll have much more meaningful experiences. And when you have more meaningful experiences, it feels like you have more time. Super interesting. I highly recommend it.
That has to be the best news and advice that I have received in several weeks. Whitney, that is amazing. And we're going to share it on Instagram, right? Keep in mind that if we're thinking about our future selves, we have a library of social media channels to share that too. So kind of fun, right?
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks so much for stopping by, my friend, and wishing you continued success, and look forward to hearing more from you soon.
Thank you for having me, Megan.
Thanks for listening to Work Trends from Talent Culture. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And I'd be really grateful if you took a moment to leave a rating and review on iTunes. It helps other people find our show. If you know someone who would enjoy listening, please share it with them. You can learn more about the future of work at talentculture.com.